Behind the glittering courts of Afghanistan's past lay a gilded cage for its youngest captives. This is the hidden history of the Bazi, the dancing boys who were performers, companions, and prisoners. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the deep cultural roots and human cost of a practice that treated boys as disposable symbols of power. How did a tradition of artistic patronage mask such profound exploitation, and why did it persist for generations despite its cruelty? What does it truly mean when a society's entertainment is built on another's suffering? The roots of this custom stretch back centuries, long before the modern borders of Afghanistan were drawn. Across the vast expanse of Central Asia, a tradition of powerful men keeping young male companions was woven into the fabric of courtly life, a practice with echoes in both pre-Islamic and early Islamic societies. It was never a simple matter of vice, but a complex institution tied to deep-seated ideas of authority and prestige. To understand its endurance, we must look at the very name it was given, Bazi. The phrase translates directly to boy play, a term that carries a deceptive lightness, almost a sense of frivolity. This linguistic framing was crucial. It allowed the reality of the situation to be cloaked in the respectable language of artistic patronage. A wealthy man, a khan or a commander, would take in a boy, often from a poor or vulnerable family, and provide him with training in music and the intricate symbolic movements of the Atan dance. The boy became a living ornament, a testament to his patron's refinement and wealth. His beauty and skill were not just for private enjoyment, but for public display at gatherings where other powerful men would witness this walking, dancing proof of one's status. In this world, masculinity was not solely defined by battle prowess, but also by the ability to command and possess beautiful things, and these boys were counted among the most prized possessions. Their presence signaled that a man had ascended to a level of power where he could afford such exquisite luxuries. This normalization within elite circles created a social blind spot, a willful disregard for the human cost behind the performance. How does a society convince itself that such a system is not just acceptable, but aspirational? The answer lies in the silent language of power, where the control over another's life and art becomes the ultimate symbol of one's own place in the world. The journey into this gilded cage almost always began with a promise. For families struggling in remote villages, the offer from a visiting commander or wealthy merchant could seem like a miracle. They would speak of opportunity, of taking a bright son under their wing to provide an education, to teach him a valuable trade, or simply to relieve a desperate household of one mouth to feed. Sometimes a small sum of money would change hands, a pittance that felt like a fortune to those who had nothing. This transaction, framed as a generous patronage, was in reality a sale. The boy was now property. Other times there was no pretense of agreement at all. A child playing near a field or walking home from the local mosque might simply vanish, snatched by men who knew his family lacked the power or resources to ever find him. The specific path then mattered less than the devastatingly similar outcome. A door closed literally and figuratively, separating the boy from everything he had ever known. Inside his new world, the initial shock was profound. The vibrant silks and the rhythmic music you heard about in the last section were not signs of celebration for these boys. They were the walls of their prison. Stripped of his own clothes and given elaborate, often feminine costumes, a boy underwent a brutal erasure of his former identity. His name might be changed, his personal history ignored. He was no longer a son or a brother. He was a dancer, an entertainer, a Bacha. His entire existence was reoriented around a single purpose: to please his master and the master's guests. Every aspect of his life was controlled, from what he ate and when he slept to the very expressions on his face. Displays of sadness, anger, or homesickness were met with swift punishment. He was taught to smile, to be charming, to perform on command. This systematic dismantling of his will was the first and most fundamental form of abuse, a psychological shackling that made physical escape seem impossible, even if the opportunity arose. Consider the sheer scale of that loss. One day you are a child in your own community, with chores and friends and a family, however poor. The next you are a decorative object in a lavish room, your movements choreographed, your voice silenced unless it is singing for another's pleasure. The trauma of this severance is difficult to overstate. These were not young men making a choice. They were children ripped from the bedrock of their lives. The ornate rooms they now inhabited, filled with laughter and music, became a terrifying landscape of isolation. The master who provided everything also owned everything, including the boy himself. This absolute loss of autonomy set the stage for everything that would follow, conditioning the boy to believe his survival depended entirely on his own submission. How does a child rebuild a sense of self when his entire world has been reduced to the whims of a single powerful man? The performance was just beginning, but the real tragedy was already unfolding behind the dancer's painted smile. The music and the swirling silks created a mesmerizing illusion of celebration, but for the boy at the center of the performance, every movement was a calculation for survival. His world was a stage and his role was twofold: to be an enchanting entertainer and a compliant object of desire. Elaborate costumes of fine fabric and shimmering thread transformed his body into a spectacle. His face was painted with kohl and cosmetics, deliberately blurring the lines of gender to enhance an androgynous appeal that his master and the watching men found so captivating. He was trained to perfection in the atan, a traditional dance of powerful, spinning steps, yet his version was altered, its movements made more fluid and suggestive for this private audience. The rhythm of the drums and the strings was not a call to joy, but the metronome of his captivity. In these gatherings, his dancing was a public display of his master's power, a living trophy proving command over beauty and art. But when the music stopped and the guests departed, the second, more sinister role began. The same boy who was applauded for his grace was then subjected to the grim private reality of his existence. He was a possession in every sense, with no rights over his own body or his own life. The abuse was systemic, a predictable and horrifying part of the system. Physical punishment for any perceived mistake, emotional manipulation to ensure dependency, and sexual violation were the unspoken rules of his confinement. He lived in a state of constant, low-humming fear, knowing there was no one to hear his cries. The law did not see him as a victim, but as property. Society, complicit in the practice, looked away, framing it as an old tradition or a private matter between a man and his charge. His entire value was tied to his youth and his beauty, commodities that were always fading. Every day brought him closer to his expiration date, a terrifying future when he would be considered used up, no longer desirable or entertaining. What becomes of a person who is raised to believe their only worth is in their appearance and their ability to please, once those qualities begin to fade? They were raised for a purpose with a built-in end date, destined to be discarded as casually as they were first acquired. The public performance of morality created a shadow where the practice could thrive unseen. In Afghan society, where honor and public piety were paramount, the existence of Bazi presented a profound contradiction. Many of the same powerful men who engaged in it would publicly espouse the most rigid, conservative values, condemning any deviation from strict heteronormative behavior. This was not just a private vice, it was a public secret, an open hypocrisy that everyone knew about but no one in positions of power would openly challenge. The Taliban, upon their rise, capitalized on this public unease, officially banning Bazi as un-Islamic, yet their condemnation was as much a political tool as a moral stance, a way to position themselves as purifiers against the corrupt warlords they fought. And even under their harsh rule, the practice did not vanish. It merely retreated further into the hidden rooms of those with enough influence to flout the very laws they claimed to enforce. This duality reveals the core of the issue. It was never truly about desire, but about power. To own a Bacha was the ultimate demonstration of one's ability to operate above the law, to possess something so explicitly forbidden to others. It was a display of dominance so complete that it could publicly defy the very social codes a man claimed to uphold. How does a system so rife with contradiction continue to function? It functions because the fear and silence of the powerless always outweighs the whispered truths they hold. This legacy of silence and power did not end with political changes. When the Taliban government fell in 2001, the subsequent power vacuum and the influx of militarized groups created a perfect storm for the practice's resurgence. With the central government weak and many regional commanders operating as law unto themselves, Bazi found a new fertile ground. Reports from human rights organizations and journalists detailed how boys were once again being taken by members of some militias and police forces, their uniforms offering a new form of impunity. The official law of the new Afghan Republic made it illegal, but the law was a paper shield in remote areas where commanders held real authority. The devastating impact on the boys, however, remained chillingly consistent. A boy forced into this life today endures the same psychological erasure, the same systematic abuse, and the same terrifying countdown to his own perceived obsolescence. He is still a trophy, a symbol of his master's untouchable status, and he is still left with a shattered identity when he is finally cast aside. The music may be modern, the costumes different, but the gilded cage remains the same. What does it say about the persistence of a tragedy when only the faces of the powerful change, while the suffering of the vulnerable remains a constant, haunting echo across generations? The echoes of this history leave us with a profound and unsettling question. How does a human life become currency in an economy of power? From its deep roots in Central Asian courts to the modern compounds of commanders, the story of the Bazi is a relentless cycle. It began with a promise that was a lie, a recruitment that severed a child from his identity. It continued in a gilded cage of performance, where every dance step was a mask for profound abuse. And it persisted through a stark social paradox where public morality provided cover for a brutal private reality. The core of this tragedy is the reduction of a person to a symbol, a living object to be displayed, used, and ultimately discarded. Their youth was their only value, and its passing was a sentence to be cast aside, forever scarred by the experience. To understand Afghanistan's complex history is to listen for these silenced voices, to acknowledge that the full picture includes these hidden atrocities. The glittering courts and powerful men of the history books had a foundation built on the suffering of the young and the vulnerable. Their stories are a crucial, if painful, part of the narrative. What are your thoughts on this difficult chapter of history? We welcome your reflections in the comments below. If you found this exploration into a hidden past compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the world's greatest historical mysteries.